Hi there. Thank you for joining me. My name is Craig Smith, Product Manager for Ticket Centre, and welcome to your Advanced Adcol training webinars. The total content for this session usually takes approximately 1 hour and a half, so we have split the sessions into 4 separate webinar components. Each will run for approximately 20 minutes, and these are pre-recorded, so you are able to pause and take a break at your discretion. Part 1, today we have for you the airline information pages, and that's just identifying what information is available to you through that airline index and referencing those pages. We'll also look at making changes before and after departure and forcing in fares, so allowing the system to tell us what's wrong with an itinerary. Part 2 will be comparing taxes, partially used reissues, and reissues ex other countries. Part 3, we have for you multiple fare reissues and sector fares changing on an international ticket. And finally, Part 4 will be specific to Qantas Type 1 and Type 2 reissues. So before we work out any Adcol, we need to do a few checks. We need to work out if our customer's ticket can actually be changed. We don't want to go through the process of working out an Adcol to only find out that the ticket cannot be changed anyway. So before beginning the Adcol process, you need to make sure that the fare the customer purchased is able to be changed. So first of all, we identify the change. Are they making a date change, a routing change, or are they changing a booking class? We make sure the coupons on the ticket are still valid. So these must be in open or airport status. We make sure the name on the ticket is the same as the customer that is making the change. And then we read the fare rules of the original fare on the ticket. So we will backdate a fare display to the original ticket issuance date, and we'll check in Galileo paragraphs 16 and 31 and just make sure that that fare is able to be changed. And finally, we'll just check the ticket's validity. So the international IATA ruling is that if no portion of the ticket is used, then the ticket is valid 1 year from the original ticket issuance date. But please refer to the airline information pages for specific airline rulings, and this is listed under the reissue additional information heading. So now we'll look at fare quote entries. Do you quote current or historical fares? This is one of the biggest questions that arises. Do you quote current or do you quote historical fares? And while we do have standard IATA rulings, some airlines have their own policies that we need to follow. So I'll show you where you can access that information. Changes before departure. The standard rule is that any change to an itinerary before departure, you must quote current valid fares for the whole itinerary. Some airlines will permit historical fare quoting if the outbound sectors have not changed, or if just a date change is taking place. This information is available for you on the airline information pages on the Ticket Centre intranet site. So I'll just take you through to the airline information pages and just show you where we can access that information. So here we have the airline information index on the Ticket Centre intranet site. We refer to the AY or Finnair airline information page, and we'll just scroll down till we get to the how-to and handy hints guide. We are looking for headings for reissues before departure, and we can see here that we are allowed to use historical fare quoting. The airline's rule is to use historical fare for repricing in the case of a change to flights of any sector other than the fare component or the first fare component. So it's a roundabout kind of way of saying that if anything on your itinerary is changing apart from the outbound flights, then you are permitted to quote historically. If the first fare component was changing, then you would need to quote with current valid fares. So that's an example of an airline's policy differing from the standard IATA ruling. and in this case Finnair, have two different policies. If the outbound is changing, then you must use current valid fares, but if any other fare component is changing apart from the first, they will permit you to use historical fares for repricing your itinerary before departure. Changes after departure. The standard rule is that if the passenger has travelled the outbound portion of their ticket, then you are permitted to quote historical fares in effect of the original ticket issuance date. Taxes would be historically quoted as well, but you may need to quote current if you are rerouting the ticket. And once again, the airline information pages will have this information for you as well. So if we refer now to the Airline Information Index again, and this time we're looking for changes after departure, and we'll refer to the South African Airline Information page. Scrolling down to our How To and Handy Hints guide, and looking for reissues after departure. The airline permits a backdated fare quote, but you must use current taxes if you are rerouting. What I have for you here is a little table to give you the fare quote entry for specific scenarios. So it's relating that information that's on the airline information pages to the actual fare quote that you are going to use. So if we are quoting current fares, if our outbound sectors have changed, then we would use FQ. If we are reroute before departure, we would also use just FQ. If our inbound sectors are changing before departure, then we would be permitted to use FQT. This entry will override the fares TTL, so you do need to be careful of that, and just make sure that the airline will permit you to use this entry, overriding any TTL or advance purchase for those outbound flights. When we are quoting historical fares, for partially used historical fare and historical taxes, we can use FQC as a carrier and add a .T quoting modifier. Partially used quoting historical fare and current taxes, we use our FQC carrier code and .H. Now the difference between .T and .H, if you haven't come across this before, is that .T will allow you to quote historical fares and historical taxes, but .H will allow you to quote historical fare and current taxes. So we would use .H in those instances for South African Airways if we have rerouted after departure and we need to quote historical fare levels but current taxes on the itinerary. Inbound date change only on permitted airlines, we can then just use FQC carrier code and our .T modifier. I will go through this a bit later or in part 2 with our partially used reissue session. But when we are quoting on partially used itineraries, we can quote or include the flown sectors of our itinerary in our fare quote. By simply using the entry display H and viewing the non-active air products in the P&R, we can view the sectors that have been flown, and when we use a .T or a .H modifier, we can include those sectors in our fare quote just to make sure everything quotes together and quotes fine. So what if my fare does not quote, but I think that it should? What I'm going to try to demonstrate here is the understanding of what is booked and then getting the system to tell us what is wrong with that itinerary. So we can force a fare in and we can get Galileo to tell us what is example here. So we'll just jump out and have a look in Galileo. So in this particular example, we have an e-ticket here. Passengers were ticketed and they're travelling Sydney-London direct on their outbound flight and returning London-Sydney direct on their inbound. So the passengers have wanted to make a change. So if we refer to this bottom left-hand window, we can see the passengers now wish to stop in Dubai on their outbound travel. So what we've done is we've booked in what we think is available and a correct fare. So we have Lima class now, Sydney and Dubai on the 1st of Feb, and then they're stopping over in Dubai and then going from Dubai to London on the 17th of February. So this is what the passenger has requested. If we fare quote that itinerary, so change before departure using just FQ, we receive no valid fare for input criteria. So what we need to do now is get Galileo to tell us what is wrong with this particular itinerary, and then we can go about trying to fix what's wrong so we're able to get an itinerary that quotes by just using FQ. So if I do a fare display on the 1st of February, Sydney to London, on Qantas as a return fare, I know that I'm looking for a Lima class fare because I have booked Lima class in from what was available. If we move down, and we know we're looking for this LL SEU fare here. So what I'm going to do is actually force that fare in, and I'm going to get Galileo to tell me what is wrong with this itinerary. I'll just demonstrate what would happen if we specified the itinerary. Galileo has returned us a fare for $2,515. Now what it's done there is it's given us a fare that is able to use the Qantas and EK flights on the outbound as they are currently booked, but we were just needing to change the booking classes to Hotel and Romeo class for sectors 1 and 2. Now that has given us a much higher fare. So what we want to do now is just find out how to fix this itinerary so we can perhaps find a cheaper fare for the LL SEU fare and give the passenger what they want at that cheaper price. So if we fare quote and we just want to sector relate and force in using our @ or kilo symbol, our LL SEU fare, and then we want to quote the inbound portion at the original fare that we had on our original ticket, which is our OL, our LON fare. If I hit enter on that, Galileo will return the fare quote for me. But what we're looking for are any error messages that are returned. So if we move down, and you can see it says here, the following rules for fare basis LLSEU, move down, and it tells us that we have a booking class failure, and we have flight application not met. So what I actually want to do now is work out where to go to find out what I need this itinerary booked in to remove the booking class failure error and remove the flight application not met error as well. So this is the example here that we can see the full filed fare returning errors in this particular example. On this next slide, I've given you the Galileo entries that relate to the particular error messages that you may receive when forcing fares in. If we receive routing failure, then we would just do a fare display and we would use the entry FR display 1. Flight application not met, we would refer to the fare rules, paragraph 4, minimum stay failure, paragraph 6, sales restrictions not met, paragraph 15. Booking class failure is also sourced from a fare display, so we would use the entry FDC displayed line number. It is 2 slashes and the airline code. Combinability failure is paragraph 10, advanced reservation not met, paragraph 5, and our stopovers not met is paragraph 8. So let's put this into practice now, and we'll just go back into Galileo, and we can see we've got booking class failure here. So what I'm going to do now is just ignore and retrieve. I'm just going to work out where that booking class failure is coming from. So if we do our fare display again, Sydney, London, and we want to refer to that same LLSEU fare, line number 11. Our booking class failure, if we refer to our sheet, booking class failure is FDC display line number. It is 2 slashes and then the airline code. So FDC display 11, 2 slashes and carrier Qantas. So I first of all just want to check my Lima class for the Sydney Dubai sector. If we hit enter, because Qantas is the owning carrier of this fare, all we do is look in the top right hand corner here and it tells us that we need to have Lima class booked. So we have Lima class for our Qantas fare, so I know that that is actually okay. So now I'm going to do the same entry, but for Emirates. So FDC displayed line number, 2 slashes, and our airline code of EK. Now this is returned line number pass data for carrier EK on a Qantas fare. What we're looking for now is on the left-hand side here. If we are using a Qantas fare on EK, then Bravo class is required for all Lima class fares. So if we refer to our itinerary, we have our Emirates sector here booked in Lima class, Dubai, London, but our fare will say that Bravo class is required for that sector. So what I'll do now is change sector 2 into Bravo class, save that in, and now we should have the correct booking classes. So what I'm going to do now is just reinforce that fare in. We can control up to our previous entry, and I'm just going to hit enter and see if we've removed that booking class error that we had before. Move down, and we have no booking class failure. All we have is our flight application not met. So what I've got now is the correct booking classes for that particular itinerary. So let's move on and see if we can try and eliminate the flight application not met. So again, we want our fare display. We can control up to our previous entry. Move down. We want line number 11 again. And then flight application not met is paragraph 4. I like to response capture the fare rules because they're easier to read that way. So what we're looking for now is just to make sure we have the correct Qantas flight and EK flight booked on our itinerary. So if we refer to our fare rules, so it says for our LLSEU fare, the fare component must not be on one or more of the following flights. And it's got our Qantas flights listed here. And what I can see is that flight QF1 is not listed in our list of flights here. So I know that I have the correct flight for my Qantas Sydney Dubai sector. So let's move on to our EK flight. And what I'm looking for is to make sure that EK11 is permitted on this itinerary. So we'll just scroll down until we can see EK. And it tells us here the fare component must not be on one or more of the following flights. And it refers to EK flights 6200 through to 6299, EK flights 9 through 12, and EK flights 15 through 16. Now we have EK11 booked, and our fare rules tell us that the flight must not be on EK flights 9 through 12. So I actually have the wrong flight number here for our EK flight. So now what we can do is another availability, and we can search to see if there's another flight that fits in within these fare rules, just to make sure it is correct, and we can try and book that in, and hopefully we'll get the fare quote that we're after. So if I do an availability for the same date, on the 17th of February, Dubai, London, and we want to use Emirates because that is what the client has asked for. We have our list of available Emirates flights here, and referring to the fare rules again, as long as it is not 9 through 12 or 15 through 16, then we are permitted to use that flight. So I reckon we might go for EK7 here. The flight departs at 3:10, which is fairly close to our original flight. If I sell in EK7 in Bravo class, I want to save that in, cancel out the sector that we don't want, which was our EK11, and now we should have the correct flights. So what we're going to do now is FQ, and let's just see if we get a fare quote returned. Perfect. So what we have now is a fare quote returning no errors, and we've actually got it at a much cheaper price than our original Best Buy. So our original quote was $2,515, but by making those recommended and knowing what we're actually looking for and doing those changes, we've now saved about $300 for the passenger, and we've given them the flights that they want. So what I'll do now is display my file fare, and what we're actually going to do is work out the Adcol on this. So you have your e-ticket up the top here, and then you have your new file fare down the bottom. So what we can do is compare our old to new. So we'll go fare value from fare value, tax value to tax value, find our reissue fee, and work out our additional collection. Now I will talk about this more in Part 2 webinar, but it is comparing taxes. The policy for Qantas is that we are allowed to compare total tax to total tax value. So I want you to go with that, and I want you to work out your old fare to your new fare, your old total tax value to your new total tax value, and then we'll find our reissue fee, and then we'll get our total additional collection. So what you can do now is just pause the webinar. The screen will remain in front of you, and I'll return in just a few moments, and we'll go through the additional collection together. Welcome back. Hopefully you went okay with that one. So what we'll do now is just go through this together, and I'll just show you the process that I use, and then we'll hopefully be on the same page. So first of all, we take our old fare value of $907 from our e-ticket, and then we just take that away from our new fare value of our filed fare. So $1,209 less $907 give us a fare value difference of $302. We then need to find our tax difference, Qantas policy, total tax to total tax value. So what I would do is I would find my total tax value by just minusing the fare value from the total original ticket value. So 1862.44 less $907 would give me an old tax value of $955.44. We would find our new tax value, which would be our total ticket value less our fare. So $2,109.94 less our fare value of $1,209 would give us a tax value of $981 Taking the two away from each other, so $981.94 less $955.44 will give us a tax difference of $26.50. Checking our fare rules now, which is always sourced from our original fare value. So we just duplicate the details from the original ticket, the 15th of February, Sydney, London, on Qantas, return, and we could backdate this to the 7th of November, which is our original ticket issuance date up here. We are looking for the OLR-LON fare, which is line number 1, FM display 1, and it's paragraph 16. We can see for changes at any time, charge $200 for reissue. So we have now our fare difference of $302, our tax difference of $26.50, and our reissue fee of $200, giving us a total additional collection of $528.50. So congratulations, hopefully you've worked that one out, and we were on the money there. So this concludes part 1 of our Adcol session webinars, and I'll be back with you for part 2. To recap on what we've gone through today, we've looked at the Adcol process and identifying if our customer's ticket can be changed. Identifying the change, making sure our coupons are open, is the name on the ticket the same, checking the fare rules of the original ticket to make sure it can be changed, and then making sure that we are still within the ticket validity. We've referenced the airline information pages to determine any reissue procedures that differ from the standard IATA rulings. And then we've also looked at fare quote entries using FQ for changes before departure, .T, which is our backdated fare entry and backdated taxes, and .H, which is our backdated fare but current taxes. And then we looked at forcing in fares, so getting Galileo to tell us what is wrong with the itinerary. So hopefully these few things in part 1 has been helpful for you, and like I mentioned before, I will be back with you